Continues.
It was during the State of the Union when the president used the speech to make a short section to talk about his desire for research on the brain.
Now, if we want to make the best products, we also have to invest in the best ideas. Every dollar we invested to map the human genome returned $140 to our economy. Every dollar. Today, our scientists are mapping the human brain to unlock the answers to Alzheimer's.
Joining us from Boston is George Church. He's with Harvard Medical School. He's a genetics professor, also has experience with the Human Genome Project. Dr. Church, thanks for joining us.
Hi, it's great to be here.
So, Dr. Church, what was the president talking about? What is he proposing?
Well, I think he's speaking in broad strokes there, and I think a number of people have weighed in since that time. I can address the science of the brain activity map, which is aimed at ultimately a project to develop technology that could bring down the cost and improve ultimately our clinical applications of measuring and stimulating large number of neurons in complex circuits that are important for human and animal behavior.
So could you first tell us where the federal government comes in as far as their ability to map the human brain, learn more about it, that's not already done at medical research facilities across the United States?
Well, I think we are very much talking about research that is already done, but the opportunity exists for making it much more cost effective for all the research that is done. There's on the order of $500 million of research that's done, and if our experience from genomics holds true, we've brought the cost down about a millionfold in the last decade for genomics. And if we could do the same thing here, it would be a huge impact on both research and clinical applications.
So on the science side, what does it mean to map the human brain?
So it's very important to think of this differently as a kind of a static map that you might use like a street map. This is a dynamic one and something that could be personalized from person to person and moment to moment. It's really technology that enables us to look not at a coarse level, but at a very fine level, individual neurons, which is the unit of activity for the brain. So the mapping is to provide us a way of looking at how our brain works in normal activity and in pathological states, and to fix it real time, potentially.
So give us an example of what faces researchers, especially if the federal government gets involved, what faces them as they go forward on this project, and what difficulty are we talking about?
Well, the opportunities here are we have some examples of brain monitoring and stimulation, like cochlear implants and retinal implants and brainstem injury, where you can get a tetraplegic to be able to move objects. These are great challenges. We have a little bit of activity clinically where you might be able to put in a dozen electrodes, maybe even 100, but to get the fine structure, you need something between the 100 that we can do and the 100 billion that exist in the brain. And that's a gigantic challenge that can be addressed by nanotechnology, synthetic biology, new optical fiber methods, and so on.
So essentially what will happen on the research side is that you'll find, I guess, test subjects to help you with this, and what does it mean for them, or how does that work?
Well, we already have clinical applications such as the ones I just mentioned that involve research subjects that have a lot to gain. Some experiments will be done in animals to develop the technology and make sure that it's safe. I think that this could go well beyond the applications that we already have in place for electrodes and become much less invasive and apply to neurodegenerative and neuropsychiatric disorders as well as normal behavior.
So because you were involved in the Human Genome Project, once a brain gets mapped, What does it do for fields like those going through degenerative diseases? What does it do for how we handle our emotions? What does it do for, how we, have memory, especially if you've survived an accident, things like that? Will those areas be improved, or the ability to understand those areas improved because of what we're doing or what's being proposed?
I think those and many others. What's important is for us not to overpromise on a particular disease and a particular date, but what we can do is make strong efforts to bring down the costs, improve the quality, lower the invasiveness of the methods, and increase the comprehensiveness. So if a neural circuit requires a very large number of neurons to be simultaneously monitored and stimulated, we can improve the technology for that. And this will be a benefit for researchers and clinicians worldwide.
A proposal?
Although it's also
go ahead.
It's also an opportunity for the United States to continue technology leadership.
A proposal to map the human brain, as it were, coming from the president. Our guest here to talk about the science side of it and what the government can do, technology that's being used, and what could happen because of it. If you want to ask him questions, here's how you can do so. For Republicans, it's 202-585-3881. For Democrats, 202-585-3880. For Independents, 202-585-3882. You can tweet us at C-SPAN WJ, email us at journal@cspan.org. Professor Church, we have an email or a tweet that says, Professor, there's much misunderstanding, so discuss what the map of the human genome is and is not, and then expand it to project for mapping the brain.
Right, so the original project for the human genome was to simply sequence, that is, determine the A's, G's, and T's that compose our genome, but we all knew from the beginning that we would also have to compare many human genomes and their traits and many other organisms. And really the payoff for the Genome Project, which has been quite large, is the technology that we can now apply in clinical settings for measuring microorganisms, for measuring carrier status, for various inherited diseases, cancer, and so forth. This is just really playing out quite amazingly in the marketplace and in research labs all over the world.
Our first call is from James, Clifton Springs, New York, Republican line. You're on with Professor George Church of Harvard Medical School. Go ahead.
Mr. George Church, Harvard Medical School. I think it's great because I had an MRI on my brain for supposedly dementia, and I almost got a kick out of it because I do not have dementia at all. And I also give you credit for working with Ted Kennedy's issue of his brain, which could be wonderful. The other issue is, through time, we have become involved with improving and hopefully, like you said, the cost. The other issue that stands real tall, the equipment that we use and the acquisition, where people dementia or Alzheimer's, and I know that Alzheimer's is generally for CPAs, bookkeeping, strong, and a very close friend of mine has Alzheimer's 1. And some people make a lot of fun of them, and I think that needs to be stopped. Thank you.
Professor Church, go ahead.
Right, so I think that you raise a number of important questions, like how are we going to get diagnostics that are accurate? Certainly that's going to require approval process, such as many of the diagnostics we have today, and that a lot of that's already in place. The cost is important, and you'll see that as a continuing refrain that we have here, and hopefully there'll be many diseases that are impacted. This will not be a cure-all or a one-size-fits-all. The idea is to stimulate out-of-the-box thinking, have our young people especially feel enabled by this, and to encourage small science in various forms.
Professor Church, I guess as an overview, how does the brain work? And then with that in mind, what's being investigated or at least proposed by this mapping project?
Right. Well, I think the general architecture of the brain and the general operations at the cellular level are understood. That what's missing are the things in between. That is, the things between the sort of low resolution structure and activity that you can see, say, in MRI that the caller mentioned, and the very fine-grained things that we can do at amazing levels of microscopy and electrode measurements. That needs to be connected. There's this whole interesting realm where the 100 billion neurons of various subsets interact, and being able to monitor them many at once is now possible, not just because of our increased computational ability to measure, model, and then feedback and stimulate, but these new nanotechnologies and finer optical technologies and so forth.
Max is from College Station, Texas, Democrats line. Hi.
Hey.
You're on, sir.
Okay, my question for Dr. Church is, do you think any spin-off industries will come from brain activity mapping?
Well, the beauty of this project, maybe even more than the Genome Project, is that that there's already a number of relevant industries which include imaging, which is diagnostic, deep brain stimulation for epilepsy, and various relatively crude treatments that can be greatly improved. So that infrastructure is in place, and we hope to improve it by factors of 10 on a regular basis. There are other industries less obvious. So, for example, artificial intelligence and big data and so forth. They can learn about how the human brain works, or they could be involved in managing the gigantic tsunami of data that will flow out of this sort of project, both research and clinical.
Dr. Church, the Financial Times had a write-up about the president's proposal and some other related matters. It talked about an effort in Switzerland called the Blue Brain Project. It goes a little technical, but it says in stimulating neural circuitry, it's involved in the process as an IBM Blue Gene supercomputer feeding data from the studies of real brains to build a virtual brain. Can you expand on that?
Sure. We do hope, as we did in the Genome Project, to have an internationally coordinated project. What we're doing in the United States already and will in the brain activity map include computational modeling. But the emphasis will be on measurement and stimulation, which allows you to test the models that are developed in computers. I think that's critical to coordinate the models with the measurements and with the tests of them.
Vicki from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Good morning on our independent line.
Good morning. I was just wondering, with regard to the gene, we found that the absence or the presence of a certain gene would indicate possible criminal behavior. How would this possibly assist when you're talking about children who come with disorders that may be bipolar or ADHD or schizophrenia that could be detected earlier? I would hope that that kind of mapping would be something that would be a priority for those people.
And especially, Dr. Church, as far as Alzheimer's, we know that about 5 million Americans living with Alzheimer's as it stands, and it impacts about 1 in 8 older Americans, the 6th leading cause of death in the U.S. So can this, I know you referred to it before, but this research kind of help those conditions later on, or at least alleviate those?
Right. So the caller correctly reminds us that genetics and stem cell therapies and so forth are extremely important parts of the research and future clinical aspects of brain technology and science, and we need to emphasize those along with this brain activity map. And I think there's going to be some tremendous opportunities for synergy. The brain activity map certainly is using synthetic biology as one of the methodologies, and we need to, but back to the question of predisposition to certain genetic disorders, this is in some cases highly accurate, meaning highly predictable. In other cases, less so at our current knowledge. It's important to consider the environmental components, and that's just really still in the future for many of these diseases, is integrating the genetics and environment, and being able to measure brain activity in a highly high fine granularity will help us connect the genetics, the environment, the day-to-day activity of the brain, and the final outcomes many years later. I think it's important to try to be as encourage these technologies allow us to be more accurate in our diagnoses
Miami Beach,
and
Florida.
treatments.
Miami Beach, Florida. Prachi on our Democrats line.
Hello.
Hi, you're on.
Hi, Dr. Church, I have a question in terms of the technology that you're going to use. We know that with functional MRI and with PET, we are able to look at cortical activation patterns. But I want to understand more, with reference to the high-resolution imaging you just talked about, microscopy and optics and laser, if we are able to utilize that during task and resting state in the live human brain, and how good are those technologies?
Right, so we're talking about a broad range of technologies. Any improvement in the current imaging methods, whether it's fMRI or DMRI or various other methodologies, would be welcome, and integrated with electrodes and optical fiber methods, which are for the most part the optical methods used in animals so far. I think they look very promising, and the opportunity here is to get increase the technology rapidly.
Dr. Church, a couple of things. The Washington Post, when they wrote about this proposal, wrote this. They said, it's easy to see how a company such as Google could build on findings from the Brain Activity Map project and build new brain assistants for our computing devices that mimic the activity of the human brain. At the same time, entirely new companies may emerge offering futuristic services such as cosmic brain surgery or total recall. Off of Twitter, we have a viewer who asked, with that in mind, does brain mapping a precursor to digitizing memories, personalities, etc.?
I think it's a little hard to predict where this is going. I think we need ethical, legal, social oversight at every stage. It's never too early to start those discussions. I think we need to also avoid overpromising if these are considered desirable. But certainly, if any of those are to happen, then we'll need projects like this to get us close enough so that we can do this in a safe and highly predictive manner.
Can you expand on your statement? We need ethical, legal oversight on these kind of matters?
Well, I think that just as we have sort of asked ourselves in the Genome Project and in synthetic biology and in many other recent fields, there's a need to think of all the different ways that this can, the risks and the benefits, the ways that can go right and wrong, and anticipate those years in advance at a time where it doesn't seem urgent. So some of the ones that were just listed on that sheet, just the tip of the iceberg, and we have such conversations going on already, and we hope to have more as this project ramps up.
Sarah from Olympia, Washington, Independent Line, good morning.
Hi, good morning. I'm curious whether or not there's been a Bayes theorem applied to try to estimate the pretest probability that we'll find anything that's worth the cost. And so you know, if you use a Bayes theorem, you have to have a pretest probability that you'll have a positive or a negative outcome, and you also have to have a post-test result, and using those two, you can then determine whether or not the pretest probability was close enough to the post-test reality to justify the cost of such a huge project. And if it doesn't match with the Bayes theorem, then how do you justify spending all this money mapping random things on random people that may not necessarily correlate between person to person, and or if you mistakenly correlate two things or more between one individual and another, well then correlation is not related to causality, so you end up with more information than you want to deal with, it seems like. So,
caller, thank you.
Right. I think you raised some interesting points, things that we are definitely on our front lines of inquiry. So the hope is to bring down the costs of ongoing research. There will be some investment required to do that, and it's hard to just apply something theoretical like Bayes' theorem in advance. But I think we can see precedents, maybe is the term, rather than something highly theoretical, where a small investment has, in the case of the Genome Project, 1 million times lower costs and higher quality have resulted. In this particular case, we want to be attentive to the cost effectiveness as you would for any diagnostic and therapeutic going forward.
What was the cost of the Genome Project, and can you relate those to how much this, or at least the federal money that might be required to make this thing happen?
Right. Well, so the cost of the Genome Project was originally estimated and delivered at about $3 billion. I think that the costs have come down considerably as a consequence of that and as activities since then. The Patel report, which Obama referred to in the clip that you showed at the beginning, estimated 140-fold return on investment. I think that and that report said that could grow over time. I think this is true of many effective technologies. It's not necessarily exceptional, but it is quite remarkable to see it happening so quickly. Just one last point on the previous caller's question about getting information that applying to one person and not to another. The intention is to have this personalized. It's the technology that we can use on a day-to-day on individuals. And the question about correlation versus causation, if we can not only measure but stimulate neurons as occurs in certain clinical procedures already for epilepsy and so on, then we can test hypotheses from the beginning of the project. And I think that's one of the hopes, is not to just collect a one-size-fits-all data set for one person and assume it applies to other people, but to test causality as we go along and and develop technology that's as low invasiveness as possible and applicable to many people real time.
How long is this type of research going to take, do you think?
Well, you know, it's something that may be better off without a strict deadline. That is to say that the Human Genome Project, in a certain sense, continues and grows now into Personal Genome Project and other, where we're now doing hundreds of thousands of human genomes already. We hope that there will be a moment or two along the brain activity map where we can say, okay, we now have technology that's capable of what we set out to do, and now let's apply it more broadly to a variety of interesting problems, both research and clinical.
This is Donald, Killeen, Texas, Republican line.
Hey.
You're on.
Hey, thank you. Good morning. Basically, I have a cleft lip and palate. A lot of doctors have told me. Hello?
You're on. Go ahead.
Yes. I have a cleft lip and palate. A lot of doctors have told me it's not genetic, but I can tell you throughout my family, I have 4, 5 in my family over several generations that have this. But regardless of that, I mean, I'm for anything that if you can find out for any reason things that basically cause certain things, certain disorders or whatever, I'm all for that. I mean,
thanks, caller.
Yeah, again, I think this raises the important point that the brain activity map should be one that's highly integrated with other neuroscience efforts, including neurogenetics and neuronal stem cells and other pluripotent stem cell projects.
Professor Church, we've been talking here about budget cuts that go or plan to go into effect next week. Does the National Institutes of Health get affected if they get budget cuts overall to the larger part of what's going on with the brain mapping project? Could that prove to be a difficulty?
Well, really, I can only address the science with any expertise, but I can offer my personal opinion, which is we need projects like this to inspire the American public to get back to its leadership position and to bring down costs and improve productivity. Hopefully that they will see this as a reason to get our act together financially and start funding some of the things that actually keep our country going.
From Twitter, Jody asks, is it true that the human brain is hardwired when you are young?
So probably the simplest, maybe oversimplified, is no, it is not hardwired. There's the whole, all the way up into very old age, we're learning, and the wiring is changing. These so-called synaptic weights are changing. We can learn to our whole life. But there is a lot that is wired up by your genetics, and a lot that is wired up during your early experiences. So it's a continuum that we will learn a great deal more about if we go forward.
Cyril is from Lincoln, California. He's on our Democrats line. Hello.
Good morning, Pedro. Thanks for taking my call. Thank you for C-SPAN. My question goes to the, and I guess it kind of relates to an earlier question, but how would you incorporate in your project, either in your assumptions or your structure, the fact that different parts of the brain can be used for different things in different individuals? For example, people who are blind from birth use their visual cortex for other senses and other things. So there's a seems to be a huge variability from individual to individual. How do you incorporate that into your project, in your structure or assumptions?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question, and I think it reflects our effort to make technology so inexpensive that it can be used for personalized medicine, in the same sense that now the genomics is cheap enough that we can have personalized genetic diagnosis and personalized therapies. In this case, it's wonderful how plastic the brain is, how adaptable it can be, as the examples you gave, and we hope that this will allow us to leverage that when we get to therapies, so that we can now repurpose different parts of the brain to compensate for either genetic, environmental, or damage-related pathologies.
David Eagleman writes in the New York Times this morning. He's a professor of neuroscience at Baylor College. He goes on to say that the brain is composed of 100 billion electrically active cells called neurons, each connected to many thousands of its neighbors. Each neuron relays information in the form of miniature voltage spikes, which are then converted to chemical signals that bridge the gap to other neurons. Most neurons send these signals many times per second. It's each signaling event would make a sound as loud as a pin dropping, The cacophony from a single human head would blow out by all the windows. The complexity of such a system bankrupts our language. Observing our brain with our current technologies, we mostly detect an enigmatic uproar. Any response to that, Professor?
I think that's right on target. It's a very poetic and accurate representation of the challenge in front of us. What's terrific about our new science, whether ranging from astrophysics, particle physics, genome projects, and so forth, is we are capable of handling big data, coming up with models that coalesce the data into something that's coherent, and then most importantly, we may be able to test it. And I think in this case, that's one of our top priorities, is being able to take this cacophony of pin dropping from hundreds of millions, billions of neurons, and turn them into models that can guide stimulation patterns and ultimately therapies.
Rhonda from Arlington, Virginia, thanks for waiting. Independent line.
Oh, thank you so much for this conversation. I just wanted to ask the guest, I'm sure he's aware that there are patents that go back for advanced technology dealing with brain research back to the 50s and 60s, and there really is no national dialogue about the research that already exists. There are support groups and victims that are coming out in droves on the internet. You can just do Google searches on targeted individuals, organized stalking, synthetic telepathy, and they are begging for help because there is a misuse, I'll give it a broad category, of directed energy weaponry, and whether it's rogue elements of government or researchers at universities, they're using this technology already and experimenting and testing on United States citizens illegally. Now, the NBC affiliate in Palm Springs, California, just did a story recently on hundreds of people hearing voices, and this was on the NBC affiliate, and through voice-to-skull technology, synthetic telepathy. Jesse Ventura just did an hour-long program on mind control technology, and I just right now Senator Ron Wyden and Richard Burr and our
caller, what's the question for our guest caller?
The question is, how do you address this technology that's already out there?
Thanks, caller.
Right. Well, I think that I think the sort of technology you're talking about is still mostly in the future, and as we mentioned earlier in the program, there's incredibly important to have these discussions about the ethical, legal, and social components of that, as we've done on other projects. We need, as each of these technologies could have incorporated into them monitoring, so that we know how the instruments are being used. There could be laws that do for surveillance of all such instruments. I think it's relatively difficult it will be difficult to work on communicating with the human brain without the full participation and close proximity to the person in question. That's certainly this project is not aimed at affecting brains at a distance, but having very intimate contact, probably currently requiring electrodes to be implanted and hooked up to computers and other devices.
Professor Church, how did you? Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
How did you get involved in brain research?
I'm a technologist from all the way back to my early education. Technology for reading and writing biological systems, that is to say, input and output at many different levels. So I've had a long-term interest in genetics and genomics, and we've recently been developing technology that's applicable to this brain activity map.
George Church joins us. He's with Harvard Medical School, talking about brain mapping, a proposal from the White House to kind of enhance what's going on already. Walden, New York, Republican line. Tom, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. My wife and I have been dealing with our daughter for 4 years plus now on a viral infection, what we thought is the cause of her sleep disorder. And I'd go to the technology and like Pandora's box, once it's open, good luck trying to change it. I agree with his ethics concern. But we're thankful for the technology because started off with an MRI, which wasn't conclusive, but now we just went down to New York City and had a SPECT scan that shows some promising things to get to the root cause of her disorder. So I just want to make that, if he's in league with the private sector also or just the government. Thank you.
Right. Yes, I think that there are some definite opportunities here for integrating with instrumentation and even microbial influences on our general health, but also specifically on behavior and neuropathology. So, as always, it would be terrific if this is a well-integrated project, integrated with ongoing research, which is amazing, as well as multiple fields that are adjacent to brain activity.
Arthur joins us from Livingston Manor, New York. Democrats line. Arthur, we're just about to finish, so if you go ahead straight to your question or comment, please.
Oh, yeah, good morning. I was wondering if you had any time frame with, as far as this mapping, of what it would do to help brain disease like Alzheimer's and maybe even criminology.
Professor Church.
Yes, right. So we hope the project as a whole will make major strides, maybe factors of 10 improvement in cost effectiveness and accuracy over the next decade. Alzheimer's and criminology may not be the top priorities nor the top payoffs for this project, possibly in collaboration with, in the case of Alzheimer's, with work on genetics and stem cell technology, we can make a small contribution. With criminology, I mean, that's a very tall order, and we'll have to wait and see how what we can do to contribute to the genetic, environmental, and brain activity components of that.
So another viewer on Twitter said, ask if you would list several of the major hoped for outcomes if brain mapping proceeds quickly and successfully.
I think certainly the variations on what's currently progressing, having to do with vision, hearing, spinal cord injuries, these are all could be improved by orders of magnitude. I think we can get at things that affect activity over large parts of the brain, where the genetics is less clear, environmental components more important, possibly such things as or other neuropsychiatric disorders, bypassing parts of the brain as occur in traumatic brain injury. There are a number of possibilities that we will be pursuing.
Final question. What was your reaction to the president even proposing this and their interest in this topic?
I think the president was speaking in fairly broad strokes. It's I think fairly evident to many people that there's a lot of interesting research, important clinically in neuroscience broadly, and we hope that this gains momentum. It seems to be gaining momentum both inside and outside of Washington.
Our guest has been George Church. He's with Harvard Medical School, and he serves as their genetics professor, hms.harvard.edu, also involved with the Genome Project, and talking to us about brain mapping and what might happen in the future. Professor Church, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Coming up on Washington Journal tomorrow, we have a shortened program because of our coverage of the National Governors Association, an hour till end at 9:30. We'll start, though, at 7, and at 7:45, a roundtable featuring Todd Zwillick of Public Radio International. He's their Washington correspondent for The Takeaway. And Leslie Clark with McClatchy Newspapers serves as their White House correspondent. We're going to talk about the latest news on sequestration, the spending cuts that are scheduled to kick in next Friday. They will share the perspectives of the White House and Congress and talk about the chances of a deal to ward off the cuts. We'll have that discussion at 7:45. And then at 8:45, a chance for you to learn about the roles and responsibilities of the top leadership positions in both chambers of Congress. Joining us, John Haskell of Georgetown University. He's their Government Affairs Institute Senior Fellow. And he'll talk about what it's like to be a leadership and a person, how those positions came to be, what their responsibilities are. And you'll get to learn more about that. That discussion will be starting at 8:45. Don't forget, our Newsmakers program kicks off on our program. That's Sunday at 11 o'clock. And Bob Goodlatte, the Republican from Virginia, will join us. As you may know, if you follow issues of Congress, he is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Talked about a lot of topics during that program. It's part of our weekly Newsmakers series. That kicks off at 11 o'clock tomorrow on Sunday. You can catch it again at 6 o'clock. You probably may have seen our previous interview earlier this morning with our guest, Governor Markell of Delaware. National Governors Association is in town this weekend, part of their winter meeting. Our coverage starts in just a few moments, 10 o'clock. You'll get to see part of their session today. Governor Markell is the co-chair along with Governor Fallon of the Republican from Oklahoma, talking about a variety of things. Again, that's part of our National Governors Association coverage. That starts at 10. You can also listen to it on C-SPAN radio. That's it for our Washington Journal program today. Again, another program comes to you tomorrow at 7 o'clock.